Hello, Aussie music fans. How are you all going? This is Saba from the Silly McWiggles project. Welcome to the new week on the Silly Talks podcast. Last week, I spoke to the frontman of a Melbourne rock outfit, Fight the Sun, about staying relevant in the biz despite not belonging to the cool kids, and the place of the heavier music scene in Melbourne, Australia, and the world. Give it a listen if you haven't done so yet, because Adrian also talked me through the band's new music and how they've been experimenting with their sound. This week, I'm changing the vibe completely again, so sit back and listen. On one fine day in February 2018, I spent the whole day at the annual Free Melbourne event, the St Kilda Fest. They have a killer lineup every year, so my agenda for the day was full of acts I wanted to check out live. One of them was a blues R&B singer-songwriter from Darwin, Caiti Baker. And it won't be an exaggeration to say that I was greatly impressed by her vocal abilities in a genre that is normally associated with more seasoned generations of musicians. So I looked for more info on the talented singer and found out even more mind-blowing facts. Caiti has released heaps of music already, and she's toured with some Aussie music legends like Goromol, Briggs, AB Original or Jessica Mauboy. She's been involved in many different creative projects in her native Larrakia land as well. I rarely have the opportunity to speak to musicians from the far north of Australia or Darwin, so I was super stoked when Caiti said yes to my request. We had a chat a few months ago already, so some things have happened since. I'll tell you all about them later. To me, Caiti is the definition of evolution in music. So I kicked off our conversation by asking her about how it all started and how it's going now.
So I was raised on pretty strict Black American music, blues, big band, soul, jazz, country blues, big band. I think I just said that. Soul, R&B, gospel. That's all I was like. You had like Charlie Musselwhite and Eric Clapton. There was a few white guys thrown in there. A little bit of Joni Mitchell, but mainly I was just indoctrinated into what I believe is the foundation for all popular music. And I think if you understand and kind of like feel the blues, I know it sounds really corny, but I feel like you can pretty much do any genre. And you probably, well, I feel like that's for myself personally, the fundamentals of blues music essentially allow me to be interested in whatever makes me feel that either that pain or that sex or that struggle, that can go out into just about every genre there is. And I don't ever want to, I guess, be pigeonholed, and I don't think I have been. I can't say that it's necessarily been in my favor in that way, because humans, we like to categorize things and put things into boxes because that's the way our brain works, I guess. But I don't think I'll ever stop evolving and exploring new ways of mashing genres together with myself and longtime musical collaborator James Munglehug, aka Kuya James, and a bunch of other amazing producers and musicians that I work with. So I think evolution in music for me stems from being extremely marinated in the blues. I wouldn't be able to do what I do if I didn't have that in my formative years. I mean, I essentially exist because of blues music. My dad met my mum through her brother. They played in a band together. So yeah, I exist because of that music.
And it's funny that you use the word indoctrinated, because I read about your family that, and your dad, and how you started very early on with music and so on. So I'm wondering whether your parents kind of expected you to become a musician and go in their footsteps, or was it more like a hope or encouragement?
Being the daughter of a blues musician in Adelaide, South Australia in the 80s and 90s, it was more of a deterrent, I think, watching, my dad was successful locally, but, they're not amazing hours. It's hard work. You've got to deal with a lot of differently wired people, which is, amazing and wonderful, and also can be extremely challenging and difficult as well. So um, I really couldn't have a conversation with my father if it wasn't about music or comedy or entertainment, really, or animals and nature. My mum loved music, but she wasn't necessarily musical. Growing up watching, I always thought, I guess, I would just be obsessed with music because I was, and I love dancing and just singing along to things. But watching him actually be a musician was probably way more of a deterrent initially. And I think I wanted to just write songs, not necessarily sing them, but like I was interested in writing songs and working out how I could get amazing singers and stuff to sing what I had written. But my father did get a 12-track digital recorder when I was 12, and he couldn't learn how to use it. He didn't bother, and I learned how to use it, and that's how I learned how to vocal stack and get harmonize with myself. But all my writing was like, a 12-year-old doesn't experience a whole lot of heartbreak or, it was obviously a lot of bullying, but I didn't want to write about that. So I was definitely not writing authentically at that age, but I was imitating and learning from all the blues musicians, and I'd become obsessed with R&B and soul and neo soul and anything I could get my hands on that was in a magazine like The Vibe or Double XL or the Source magazines from the news agencies, obviously pre-internet. Well, there was internet, but it wasn't super common, LimeWire and that. So yeah, my parents, I don't think, they really just encouraged me to, if I wanted to follow music or have a passion, they really wanted me to have a vocation behind me to support that, because my dad didn't really have a vocation behind him. He worked in some, in construction industry a little bit, but that injured his back. And so he was pretty much just a musician. So my mum was the breadwinner. It was very much like, get a vocation so that you can support yourself and treat music as a hobby. So that's it's kind of been what it's been. And I met James properly when I was, 18, 19 years old, and I had already started one band with a friend, and I was writing stuff with a bunch of friends and local rappers and whatnot on hip hop instrumentals and stuff. So music has always been, I guess, like my father, this center point of my existence. So it was going to happen either way. But my parents didn't know I could sing as well as I could until I was 16.
Okay. Did you know that you could sing so well?
Yeah. Well, I think so. Maybe I had one of those I saved up. I worked at Macca's when I was in high school, and I saved up those big stereos with the big subs and the big 5 CD stack change and the cassettes. I bought one of those, and for streets you could hear the bass because I'd play it that loud. And I'd sing along, and then I worked out very quickly that I was quite loud and I could project. So I found a place very close by to my suburb that overlooked a 6-lane highway, and I could jump in with the shrubbery, and I could look down and see the cars passing underneath, but no one could hear me. So I could just be as loud as I wanted, and no one would, I wouldn't feel shame or embarrassment or anything like that. So I think I'd worked out that I was quite, I had abilities to project, and I was very fortunate to be raised with amazing vocalists, everyone from Big Mama Thornton, Etta James, Aretha Franklin, Nina Simone, Billie Holiday, all of the one, Little Walter and B.B. King, all of the greats. And my dad is also a blues musician, so he had a natural talent. So I got something from him, obviously, and used to sing a lot at school, always sang, probably annoyed a lot of my friends with it. But I don't think my parents really understood the capacity I could sing at until I was about 15, 16.
As it often happens, Caiti didn't start as an R&B singer right away. Like every teenager, she was fascinated with the same music genres her peers were listening to. So let's hear more about the different stages of her music journey, some of the influences that shaped her style over the years, and her first music projects.
Blues, not so much necessarily, but R&B and hip hop. Like I was as equally obsessed with hip hop as I was with R&B. Love Jay-Z, love Wu-Tang Clan, Dr. Dre and Snoop. Who else was I into obsessively for a while there? Atmosphere, Immortal Techniques, Little Kim, Foxy Brown, Mace, Bad Boy, the Bad Boy Crew, Puff Daddy, and heavily into Missy Elliott, massively into Missy Elliott, Timbaland and Aaliyah, and Genuine and Nicole Ray, and all of that music in Australia wasn't popular at all because it wasn't, I guess, reported on mainstream wise. But myself and my friends, I lived in a very multicultural suburb of Brisbane in the south during this time after moving from Adelaide when I was 12, 13. So my friends, we were all obsessed with Janet Jackson and Mariah Carey and Faith Evans and all of the mainstream hip hop that had like made its way through Coolio and all of that. But there was a small collective of us that used to, order in the Source magazine or Double XL, The Vibe, and we would go through, and LimeWire on the internet was quite fresh. So I'd go through and type in and illegally download all these songs and then make little mixtapes and stuff. And I was very fortunate to find a community radio station in Brisbane on 4ZZZ called Black Beat. So every Sunday night from 8 till 10, they would play all the exclusive music from America that wouldn't obviously be played on normal radio. And I used to tape it onto my cassette. So the whole week I'd just listen to 2 hours of new music and then obsessively research everything that I could. I still have all of this back in my dad's place. I've really got to go and get it at some point.
Cool. So I guess you were, maybe because of your background with musicians and the music that you were exposed to, I can see that you did a lot of searching on your own. So it's not like that music was kind of on the radio and you listened to it, but you proactively went and looked for it, right?
Yes, absolutely. Like the household, my dad had complete control over whatever was being played, whether it was on, the TV or the radio, and he played music as well. So there was constantly blues playing or rock and roll or big band, jazz, country, whatever it was. And he was if he was home, he was in the couch and he was playing his guitar as well. So I've learned how to tune that kind of stuff out while trying to focus on other things. But I was kind of immersed unintentionally. Like I didn't really love it at the time, I guess, because, it's old music and, it's not what it's not what my friends are listening to. But as I got older, I realized how grateful I was for that very, very fortunate upbringing in the music that he had us soaking in all the time. So yeah.
Okay. So since we started with your formative years, so to speak, maybe let's go in a way chronologically through what you've been doing. So I dug up some information on Sietta. Yes, was that your first project?
Well, officially, yeah. I had another little band that I did a 4-track demo recording with called Arily. That was years ago. They're not released. They're not terrible songs. I should bring them out really and redo one or something. I'm not too sure. But then I met James, Kuya James, properly when I was about 18 or 19, something like that. And he was a bass player in a hip hop band called Culture Connect, who were originally from Darwin, and they'd moved to Brisbane, and I was living in Brisbane at the time. And one of the band members had a sister that went to my high school, and that's how I met everyone. And James was just starting up in production, just getting his interest in computer production with Pro Tools and whatnot. And he showed me a couple of his beats and I was like, yes, please, I'll take that. So I started writing to them and had a little foray into playing live with this band at the same time. But once I became obsessed writing to instrumentals I just kind of didn't stop. So I was just constantly like, give me more, I want more. I'll just write to hip hop instrumentals or whatever you've got, I'll write to. So that's how Sietta initially formed. We moved to Melbourne, and we're able to be linked in with some really amazing musicians and producers there to work on our debut EP called The Comeback Easy Play. And from there, we managed to spark the interest of a label in Sydney who signed us. And we released 2 EPs and 2 albums through the Sydney label Elephant Tracks over the span of about 6 years, I think. And we toured nationally. We did a little bit of international touring as well. So yeah, there's a stack of Sietta songs out there.
I think a stack is an understatement, Katie, because sometimes when you start, I mean, normally what happens is when you have your kind of first serious band, you probably have a song or two, but you guys released so much material. It's like I was impressed to see it. I didn't know it even existed.
Thank you. Yeah, it's all out there still. It's kind of strange. Every now and then, like every 2 or 3 years, I'll go and listen to the albums from start to finish and just be, oh, cool. Not as cringy as I thought they were going to be. And they're not. They're great songs.
Now, this next part of our chat is what I call the road to Caiti Baker. At this stage of her life as a musician, Caiti experienced a combination of different factors that led to her mental health being affected. She's very open about it and takes it as a lesson learned in both her personal and professional life. But I'm just giving you a heads up already that we're talking about some serious stuff for the next few minutes.
Yeah, so during the time that I spent a lot on the road, living in Melbourne, I was also working as a graphic designer. That's my vocation, it's my trade. I was struggling with quite a few mental health issues, an incorrect diagnosis that led to multiple pharmaceutical medications being prescribed to me that I did not need. Had chronic fatigue syndrome and a bunch of other chronic health issues, all at the same time. That just kind of compressed into not a very happy person, I guess. No one really knew. I was able to put on a front and tour. James definitely copped the brunt of it, but we spent about six years on the road touring those albums and creating new music and putting together different shows and collaborating with a bunch of amazing artists around the place. And it was 2013 or 2014. I met someone who was able to properly diagnose me with what was going on, and she was able to treat me. And it was kind of like in a transitional time. We'd kind of just like wrapped everything up with the label in Sydney. Decided to kind of, move away from that direction. And in kind of tandem with these mental health issues as well, I'd also had a massive falling out with my father. I hadn't spoken to him for about 4 or 5 years. And I think a lot of that time he wasn't engaged at all with anything that I was doing. So, a lot of mental health issues, chronic fatigue, very tired, very inflamed, not super present at all. Still write a song, still could perform, still could, put on a face and be able to engage with fans afterwards. But it was a lot. I think it was 2013, 2014. And James just said, your dad's getting old. This is whatever this was, just maybe bury the hatchet. So we slowly began to, I guess, try and start our relationship from scratch again. In that same period, I was able to come off all of my medication. I was treating myself properly. I lost a stack of weight that was just there for inflammatory reasons and poor diet, obviously. My mental health cleared up within 3 months of actual proper diagnosis and came off all my meds, reconnected with my father, and we met and he surprised us with this USB key that had about 150, 200 little sound bites of him playing guitar into a crappy little Nokia phone. I don't know how he got the files off. I think a friend of his did it for him, but he managed to get this USB key to me and James, and was like, if you want to use this, please do. And James is, a prolific hip hop producer, and so if someone was to hand him, some, bit crunchy, dope blues guitar riffs and ideas and rhythms and some vocal ideas and whatnot that were completely original, doesn't have to clear them at all. He was able to make all of these amazing instrumentals from these little samples, and that wasn't the intention initially. As we were going forward into the next chapter of what we were going to be, I definitely I guess I had issues when I was unwell, going by my name. I guess imposter syndrome or whatever it was. I didn't feel like I could back who I was, the way I was mentally. So that's why we were called Sietta. I guess we just wanted it to be an equal partnership. I guess everyone just assumed that I was called Sietta anyway. But I was able to, keep my privacy intact for my own mental space, I guess. So after, I guess, cleaning myself up, coming off all the meds, treating myself better, learning what my actual condition was and treating that accordingly, I kind of felt like I was able to stand behind my name. So we decided to move back to Darwin from Melbourne. We'd spent a lot of time in Melbourne, and as I mentioned before, I don't like the cold. So if I can be in a place that is like predominantly warm or hot, that's where I'm going to be. So we moved back and started collaborating with a bunch of new producers, and kind of coincided at the same time as reconnecting with my dad. So initially the direction that I wanted to go in and I was writing songs for was more of the R&B sound that I'm releasing now. But because that guitar USB opportunity came up, I couldn't pass that up. And, James is such an amazing producer, and we were working with Michael Honan, who has worked with the formidable Dr. G, Darwin Unipingu. So we did an album with them called Zinc, which I guess is the namesake for one of the nutrients that I'm vitally deficient in, which is part of the condition that I have and was able to treat myself. So I have to take a lot of zinc for the rest of my life, basically. And that's kind of how we transitioned from Sietta into Caiti Baker. And James still produces everything that I do in collaboration with some other producers as well. And he's got a solo career and works with a bunch of amazing artists across the board, all across Australia, different genres as well. So yeah, it all kind of switched around in 2014, 2015.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that story. I can tell it's very personal for you. And yeah, it's amazing that sometimes, even like the very negative and traumatic experiences can bring out some good, and then creativity in you as well. So, well, I'm sorry that you went through all this rough period, but at the end of the day, we got Caiti Baker. So I guess we are thankful for that in a way all the time.
Yeah. I have a very strong, like I said, if I don't kind of like feel pain, trauma, or sex from music, I personally just can't connect with it. And it's not to say that it's not, bad or quality or whatever it is, but there's something in catharticism in music and therapizing your pain that I guess allows people to grasp onto and connect with. So yes, that's what I do personally. So it would make a lot of sense that every song I write is deeply personal, whether I've just like layered metaphors over it or whatnot. People wouldn't have any idea what it's truly about, but it's helping me get through my own shit. So yeah.
I initially wanted to talk to Caiti about her album Mary of the North, released in June 2020. That's because I've been to Darwin and the far north of Australia only once. But that record transports me back almost immediately. It's the music, the visuals, and its entire vibe. So I wanted to know about how it came to be and how one of the songs from it ended up being a theme for a very unconventional podcast.
So it originally, I was at the end of my cycle on Dust Part 1, and I'd just been touring a lot in 2017 and 18. A lot of touring, my own stuff, and also with AB Original as well, and Briggs. And so 2019 was a little quieter. So I was back home writing some new stuff. And James and I were thinking about doing some like local gigs around town just to earn a little bit of money playing acoustically. Mm-hmm. And we initially thought we would just call ourselves Mary of the North, like a little side piece band kind of thing that just played around Darwin every 2 weeks or so. Time got the best of us, but we had started putting together a bit of a concept album, and it's completely James's concept. He's obsessed with incredible Ludwig Göransson, who's famously produced a lot of the Star Wars stuff and Childish Gambino, and Tom Waits. And we just James really wanted to create a concept album that encapsulated where we lived, how we felt about it, tell stories of journeys that people could, relate to if they'd been here or if they, were interested in coming to the territory. So it's a little bit autobiographical, a little bit fiction, a little bit fantasies. There's a lot going on, but it's all all of the production is James. And the songs, we smashed it out in about 6 months. It was a really quick album to write. And very, very shortly after recording it, COVID happened. So couldn't really tour it. But I was able to release it, and I didn't want to hold on to it. I just wanted to get it out there. And I collaborated with a Darwin icon artist called Frank Goya. He's a Frenchman originally, but has lived in the Northern Territory for decades, and he's an amazing artist. He has a book, he has gallery showings, he's has prints. It's kind of like a Darwin staple if you own a Frank Goya print. We've got about 6 in the house, and I wanted to collaborate with him, so we created a bit of a scene. Took some photos and sent it to him, and he did his magic, and we did the screen printing, and so I've got posters available, and then also became the artwork for the vinyl and the CD. So very Territorian, I'd say. It's very
and Mary of the North as well. I found out yesterday, which I didn't know about. There was a spin-off of Mary of the North, which kind of led to another project with the song "Worth It," where you provided it as a kind of like soundtrack or the main theme for a podcast, which is with women from Darwin prison, is it? And
That's right.
I listened to a few episodes yesterday and to your interview with the girl, and it's amazing. And I'm like, wow, I didn't even know it existed. Can you tell me something about that project, why it was important for you to kind of participate in it, and why it is important in Australia, like for international audiences to talk about it, so they have an understanding?
So in a way, that's probably a very pivotal moment of the Mary of the North album being, I guess, birthed in a way. So James and I had this idea initially to be, a little acoustic act and just call ourselves Mary of the North. And then we were approached by a friend who's a creative here in Darwin called Johanna Bell. We call her Yo. And she runs Story Projects, which is a production house for storytelling. She's a writer herself, but she loves to collaborate and tell stories that are not necessarily heard in the mainstream. And she'd always been a big Sietta fan, and she was a fan of my solo stuff and everything that James had done. And she on a whim kind of came to us and said, "Hey, I'm working on this project. Would you guys want to do the theme song for it?" And I said, "Oh, cool, like we can write something from scratch if you like, or we could throw some things around." And she said, "Let me have a listen to what you're working on." And at that point I was working on Dust Part 1, which had Saint, Gasoline, Gone and Enough on it. she really liked Saint, and so she was thinking, well, maybe we could do Saint, but it wouldn't work out with the labels. So I said, look, I've got a whole entire folder on my phone that's just filled with lyrics that I'd written, or songs that I'd started. And there was a song that I'd started writing with James on tour in winter in Melbourne, I think maybe about a year and a half beforehand. And I was really cold, really, really cold, and just exhausted, I think. And I just started writing these lyrics, and James and I were mucking around with chords on the guitar and kind of came up with this song called Worth It. And I found it and I thought, oh, maybe that kind of like resonates a bit with, you know, the overall theme of her podcast. So I sent her the lyrics and she said, this is perfect. What does it sound like? And so we sent through like a really rough demo that had just been recorded into the phone. And she's like, this is perfect. This is awesome. Did you want to come into the prison and meet the girls? And I was like, of course. So over the span of a year, we spent, I think, about 4 to 6 times going into, it was about 6 times we went into the prison, and spent time with all these women doing workshops, yarning it up, just talking, laughing, getting to know each other. And eventually we got to a point where we were able to sing the chorus all together and have it recorded. We had to do it in one of the toilets, which was jamming 15 women into a disabled toilets, and Yo on the floor there with her Zoom microphone, you know.
But amazing acoustics, I can imagine.
Yeah, incredible acoustics. So, yeah, that's kind of how all of the music apart from the guitar in that song Worth It is found sounds from the prison, taken by one of the inmates, who was a percussionist. So James did an amazing job producing the production up for Worth It, and then one of our good mates who's an incredible guitarist called Toby Robinson here in Darwin, he laid some guitar over it, and the vocal that you hear on Worth It is actually my demo, my first proper demo vocal after the one into the guitar. So I was meant to redo it, but it just didn't. It just wouldn't work. I had to leave it. It was the right vibe and everything. So just added the voices of the amazing women in the prison, and it became this whole other thing that allowed us to kind of push Mary of the North off. You know, there was a sound there was a story. So yeah, really proud of it. And you know, I'm still in contact with some of the women in prison, and really proud of their stories and the reach that they've had, and you know, the awards that they've won, which, you know, don't really mean anything other than it's likely that a lot of people have now heard their stories, which warms my heart and makes me incredibly happy, because the system's so messed up. And it's, you know, life isn't fair, but that's definitely not fair at all. Because I would say, you know, from my experience being in there and learning from these amazing women, that at that point I was in there 100% of the reason that they were in there was because of a man. So it's just really nice and empowering to be around amazing women who, you know, were doing what they had to do because society and all of the things, I guess, emotions, rawness, laughter, pain, love, it's all there. So yeah, I'm glad you got a chance to listen to a couple of the episodes. It's pretty special, and I'm really proud of the whole entire team that put that together.
The Bird's Eye View podcast we've just spoken about was released between February and April 2020. It was a time when the pandemic was slowly starting to shut things down in the whole world. But for Australia, and especially the Northern Territory, it was a bit of a different story. And on that note, Caiti explains how the Larrakia land briefly became the centre for live music in Australia during the first lockdowns.
And the Darwin Festival obviously had to cancel everything in 2020 that was international. But because COVID didn't get to Darwin or the Northern Territory at all for pretty much the entirety of 2020, they were able to make the festival completely local. It was very weird and bizarre because obviously, you know, 2020 was quite a rough year for what I assume is most of the world. I have a feeling Darwin Festival might have literally been the only festival that actually occurred in the world, potentially. I could be wrong. But we had a festival. It was awesome. And very briefly, Darwin became the centre for live music in Australia. So people were actually begging to do quarantine. They would come up, do 2 weeks of quarantine just so that they could play shows. We didn't get a break in 2020. So I think whilst, the majority of our contemporaries and friends and homies down south were like, isolating and not being able to like leave their homes, we got burnout. Like it was a lot. It was a whole other kind of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the seasons here in Darwin, but traditionally for the Larrakia, there's 6 seasons, but in Whitefella Way, it's essentially 2, just dry and then wet, and then the build up in the middle. And our wet season here is currently what we're experiencing now. It's not very tourist friendly, rains a lot, it's a bit muggy, not very comfortable, can't really do a lot of outdoor stuff, whereas the dry season is the opposite. It's very, very dry. The humidity is kind of not super present. It's very comfortable. So we're tourist heaven for like 6 to 8 months of the year. And then it becomes quite, humid and sticky and a bit uncomfortable. And then the wet season. And because of COVID and all of these opportunities, no one stopped. So normally during wet season, we would have a break just to exist and, enjoy a bit of a ghost town. But no, not 2020. We, so many arts workers and production people and musicians were just exhausted, just didn't stop. But, obviously we were very grateful to have jobs and work to do, but that rolled around into 2021 and didn't stop, didn't slow down. So I now have some mates who are literally getting their first holiday in 2.5, 3 years. So it was a very different experience for us in the Northern Territory.
So we're going to pause this story for now. Let's say we got to 2022 pretty much. Everything from this moment onwards is the new Caiti, and it has everything to do with the album Under Our Galaxy that Caiti dropped on May 13th, just before my birthday. The next episode, The Silly Encore, is all about that record and a new chapter in Caiti's professional life. You'll find links to some of the projects and people we spoke about in this episode in the episode notes. You should also definitely follow Caiti because we've only covered a small bit of her experiences in the music world. As usual, find me on thecitymcwiggles.blog for more Australian music-related stories. I'm not super present on socials these days, but I drop some content once in a while. Supporting me on Patreon would also be greatly appreciated. Thanks heaps for listening. I appreciate your time. And come back for the rest of the chat with Caiti Baker in the Silly Encore in a couple of days. See you soon.